Hi everyone, thanks for coming over and looking forward to this discussion. My name is Paul. I'm the head of Cointelegraph Accelerator, and my day-to-day job is to nurture the relationship between builders and investors and trying to help them find each other. Which is why this discussion is very interesting for me personally, because I talk to founders every day and looking for insights from the investors. I'm going to introduce very briefly our panelists, and then we can start with the first question. So we've got Jake Brockman from Coinfund, Shayan Sengupta from Multicoin Capital. Multicoin Capital. Ray Shang from 7XVentures and Terry Culver from Digital Finance Groups. So basically, the firms that you're working with don't need introductions. We kind of know the brands and know your stories. But I guess I want to start with the first question and ask you to briefly describe your main thesis on the intersection between crypto and AI, so that it's easier for both builders and founders who are, the investors that are entering the space to navigate those complicated terms, because there's data and compute and like governance. So what is the opportunity there in the intersection between crypto and AI? And so we'll start with Jake, please.
Thank you. Great to be here. So they say that you could bring like AI to Web3 or Web3 to AI. Bringing AI to Web3 to me means like using AI models to enhance the experience of being on chain or kind of analyzing data in Web3. But bringing Web3 to AI means that we're using Web3 primitives to create a pipeline that is much more open and democratized for the creation of AI models. And the latter is what I'm much more interested in, although I think the first category will also have a bunch of interesting applications in the future. But I'm a deep tech guy and investor, and I really like thinking about the tech stacks that produce technological products and services. So there's a certain pipeline, as I said, that creates AI products, and that pipeline consists of human capital and expertise, data, compute, training, inference, kind of the stuff that Matt pretty much laid out in the slides before. And today that pipeline is owned by like a handful of large technology companies that are all located on the West Coast of the United States. And I think what the opportunity is to open up that pipeline and enable AI to be created in a much more open source way than it is today.
Yeah, definitely agree with a lot of that. I think the specific subset of things within crypto that I'm most excited about are they map nicely to coordination problems and resource allocation problems, and like the vast majority of my investing has been using crypto capital markets and token-based incentives to try and pull those levers. And so, when you think about broadly the set of things that we're talking about very practically within AI, I think you think of things at the compute layer and the model layer and the data layer. There's very interesting things at each layer of that stack, whether it's finding latent resources that aren't being materially used in the supply chain for doing things like training or inference or fine-tuning. At the model layer, whether it's finding ways to aggregate, take the same data set and derive different insights from it by having open competitions in markets for people to tune and test whether or not a certain input yields better outputs into different models. I think open markets for comparison and the kinds of things that Crunch and BitTensor are doing along those dimensions is super interesting. I think at the data level itself, this is sort of like the meme right now, is that the bottleneck isn't necessarily compute or models themselves, it's finding the right sets of data. And we've seen certain instantiations of using tokens to create new sort of quote-unquote data DAOs. But I think that's going to become a lot more interesting as you get more and more specialized data. And so, there's plenty to touch on in each of these things, but really the core thesis is using crypto capital markets, permissionless value transfer rails to create and solve structural arbitrages in either sourcing resources or aggregating them in some way. And that's why we're big fans of Livepeer as sort of the original stewards of that sort of vision with orchestration specifically around transcoding in media.
Yeah, 100%. Addition to that, I feel like tokenized AI and decentralized AI is kind of two concepts doesn't necessarily be the same, right? So if we're talking about tokenized AI, we use the crypto to incentive mass contribution to the data model, or like data scraping, data labeling, cleaning, or the model inferencing, etc. And there's another perspective that you can tokenize the important property of AI, for example, the data, the model, and even the compute power itself. For example, in the future, if we see GPU act as gold in the future of AI-oriented future, so we see this illiquid GPU nowadays, but you can actually bring it on chain just like RWA. So all the profit generated from the GPU as a service product can be the yield of your asset. So it can combine with all the DeFi feature product together. So this some part of the tokenized AI I like, or like everybody focus on. There is another aspect of decentralized AI where we more focus on the true tech, about like decentralization, about like privacy, about transparency, which I think we will talk about more later.
Yeah, thank you. I think to complement some of the very good comments here, I would say we also think about the opportunity in AI from a social dimension. Because technological change is a function of social and economic needs at the end of the day. And the opportunity that we see in AI is one where the world already recognizes the problem. It's not resistant to blockchain trying to help solve that problem, which is how do you manage data in a data-driven world and a data-driven economy? If we think about maybe one of the initial applications of blockchain, right, innovation and money, there's still resistance into the world into that application, whereas with AI, the world is grasping for solutions, and so I think it's actually an opportunity for blockchain to step in and help provide some of those solutions.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. So you all spoke about data, and Jake, you specifically mentioned the big tech companies. So just to segue this discussion, I remember back in the days, in the early days of social media, there was a concept for founders and for investors just to build products specifically for a strategic sale to a big tech company. Do you think this strategy still holds true on the background of like significant centralization of capital with the big tech firms? And how do you see the way founders can compete in this environment where the majority of the data and majority of compute resources are centralized in big tech companies?
I don't think it's the same structure that you're alluding to where people build these projects for acquisition. I think on the contrary, decentralized AI is on the forefront of doing what I think blockchains are at the core. The thing that will be eventually like the legacy of blockchains, which is like decentralized public goods. And the question of how to compete with the centralization of resources is a really good one, because a lot of people make the argument like, well, look, all the compute is already sort of owned by big tech companies. What is really the opportunity? But I think the answer is like the only way to counterbalance that imbalance is through something like a decentralized network. And the way that we sort of know that is because, for example, Bitcoin is the largest supercomputer in the world. Like we know that we can use crypto economic incentives to build networks that are that eclipse in resources like other more centralized approaches. So if compute is going to be the bottleneck for scalability, which is the bottleneck for intelligence and so forth, then like I would argue like the only way to compete with that is by building a decentralized network that can get more resources. And of course that comes with a lot of like nuanced technical problems, like for example, does that network have to be made of high-end compute or kind of commodity compute? And if the latter, like who's working on that? Because big tech isn't.
And I would go further and say that the centralization of compute is actually a fundamental weakness when you start to think about the size of the data sets required to do what AI is promising to do. And in that world, decentralization is really the only viable way to protect that data, to protect against capture. It's actually a case where decentralization is actually a clear value.
Yeah, I think specifically for data, I think there's a lot of open questions as to what property rights mean for the purposes of training, right? Like it actually takes the New York Times suing OpenAI to start a conversation about whether or not you can scrape the internet and what quote unquote value belongs to the originator of a piece of content. And fortunately, crypto systems are good at provenance and attribution, and I can sort of very much see a world someday where the guarantees around whether a piece of training data is owned by kind of an individual person or is public property on the internet, that kind of record system should live on chain because that's kind of what these systems are for. And so I think there's like pretty rich design space like on the data side, and of course the compute angle is very much there.
Yeah, it's also about, for example, you're thinking about data. There's like data scraping from open internet. There's some data is from like closed source company internal data, or there's some like user actively generated data. So like how can you, so in the future, it wouldn't be efficient for that. So how can you incentive mass people to contribute the data? And also imagine right now, if we want to train train the model or like inferencing, we need to access to a database and do whatever. But in the future, if we imagine this massive AI network, we have to be quickly get the data from relative open network and in a really frequent way. So how can we make that happen? That has to be some like open data marketplace. It doesn't necessarily to be, fully, every data is a token. It could be SIME or like a non-fungible or whatever, but everyone should be access and contributors should be benefit from it. And the same thing as compute. For example, A100 or H100 right now is like really costly and limited resources. But imagine I invest in a company called Exo Labs. They can use the edge computing, like whatever your Apple Watch or like iPhone. You can use it as create your personal like private cluster for edge inferencing. Imagine if like none of us is using our phone, right? But we can actually renting our like GPU or whatever to like contribute the data. So it's really about leveraging mass like power to contribute the AI future.
So like Airbnb for your GPU, like.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So now, if we switch from the thesis to more like practical questions that founders and builders may want to ask. So how do you actually select projects for your investment? So what are you looking for exactly in this specific vertical? So what are the key criteria that you're looking at?
Well, first, I think the area that is investable right now is kind of the lower levels of the stack. So we've been looking at GPU aggregation, decentralized training, decentralized inference, a little bit of data. I'm personally attracted to solving difficult problems. Like, for example, you might notice that there are, I don't know, like 50 to 70 verifiable inference startups out there. And there's all kinds of strategies for inference, but none of them are particularly efficient. But the problem of creating an efficient, verifiable inference network is a difficult problem. Some people are working on it. When you look at decentralized training, like 6 months ago, like consensus was like it's impossible. It's not a problem worth working on. It's too slow, etc. But there were about maybe like 3 companies in the market working on it. There's now like 6. I think that the way we have approached it is, at this stage of the game, to solve those really difficult problems, you really need to have an AI background at this point. And so we've erred on on investing in founders who have serious experience in the AI world. So it's usually someone who like worked in the traditional AI world or has an AI PhD or something like that, and who have come into Web3 and are starting to add these kinds of Web3 primitives into their product because they think that the Web3 primitive will make their product better and competitive with Web2 approaches. And therefore, that product should go and be sold to Web2. So there's some people building it's a common trope in crypto, right? Like building for Web3. But I do think strongly in this vertical, like we want to be building for Web2 and showing that these are actually better products. And if we can't show that, then I think we failed. And so, if you look at kind of the investments we've made to date, they all have this common theme of really strong traditional AI backgrounds, building in Web3, and trying to create these kinds of competitive advantages.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the kind of singular question is being able to articulate very cleanly and plainly who the first customer is and what the properties are of the first version of the product. It's almost sort of instead of going for the really large problems, which are amazing and super interesting, I sort of have less conviction on what the state of the world is going to be like in 18 months, 24 months, given acceleration timelines. And so the thing that I index more heavily on is, are you able to build something today that someone's going to use in 6 months? And so if you look at our investments at the compute layer, things like I/O or Cusco or Render or things in that broader domain, we've been super clear about what are the orchestration systems you're going to use, what does the hardware profile look like, and who does the customer, like what specific type of inference, what model, what use case, how much do they pay, right? Like we try to be very pragmatic. If you look at things at the model layer, we look at Crunch, we are very explicit about the fact that these are the types of customers that are looking for, a community of ML researchers to solve these problems, and we want you to, like unleash the problem on them. So it's a little bit more sort of narrowly focused on how can you build systems that are going to serve people today, and then sort of working sort of backwards from there.
Yeah, I feel like for me, it's always a founder. Like for early stage investments, I feel like crypto AI could be somewhere really hyped. Like people come here and build something and launch their token. So for me, it's really important to see like dedicated founders with non-short-term speculation purpose, or they're not here for building a narrative. They come here for a true mission. And at the same time, but they have to get to manage or navigate their short-term or mid-term goal with the long-term goal. For example, if you're telling me that you're building a ZKML project, I have a lot of respect, but currently you have like 100x or at least 30x overhead compared to like normal. It's not like sufficient market at the moment. And also, for example, getting back to your point, decentralized training at the moment, the bandwidth required by backpropagation and the hardware limitation right now could be somewhat bottleneck. But I do believe that future. So how can you, if you only have like 2 to 3 years runway, how are you gonna navigate your way throughout the whole process? That's really important. And also I do agree with Jake. It's really, so for example, thinking about a data company, they're actually selling data to Web2 AI company. They're competing with Web2 peers. So how can you take the advantage, for example, price, performance, and you need a lot of equivalent BD efforts. That's really important, and I don't think announcing huge collaboration with Web3 company can really help with that. So I really pay attention to what's their traditional background and how deep they're in this field.
Yeah, I think for us, the first thing we look at, and this is a threshold issue, is how is the project protecting and perpetuating censorship-resistant networks? To your point, that's how we're going to find out whether these products are actually superior to what you can build in Web 2. Beyond that, we're very interested in the lower levels of the stack. So decentralized compute, storage. What are the building blocks that can help blockchain AI grow? And in our view, it's very early in the arc of this interaction between Web3 and AI, way too early in our view for really viable commercial applications. or even the most viable commercial applications will come about almost as a surprise, like they're unknown at the moment. So we're much more focused on the core technology that will let different applications proliferate.
Okay, well, from your answers, it seems that the most important thing in that new builders need to look at is that they should be targeting on a specific problem, and it should be difficult problems that no one else can solve. And it seems that that overall, like the VC narrative is about investing in the infrastructure rather than consumer-facing apps, because it seems that the consumer-facing apps are going to be solved by a different vertical. So maybe it's important for the builders to kind of focus on that. And then moving on to my next question about finding the right founder and finding the right product across the globe. So crypto is global by nature, right? And any projects that starts can be global. When you're looking for projects, how important is geography for you? Of course, you have regulations for your funds, but if you're looking for projects in Asia or in Europe or in US, does it actually bring any restrictions on where you can invest? And not just like from the regulation perspective, more from the cultural perspective, right? So I guess the short version of the question is, where do you think what is the best place to look for founders, and is this vertical as global as crypto in the first place?
Well, I think like by way of mandate, Coinfund invests globally. In practice, I think we do probably have a weight toward American, European, Asian companies. In decentralized AI, my experience so far has been that probably the best founders, at least for the projects that we've invested in, have come from the US and Canada so far, but I'm sure that can change. I know there's a lot of people like here in Singapore working on various AI projects as well. And then culturally is a very interesting question, because I think one cultural dimension is that just like in Web3 in general, there's kind of two AI cultures, if you will. There's like the Web2 AI culture and the Web3 AI culture. And I think in many ways, the problem of making decentralized AI successful is convincing the traditional AI people that this is something that's real, that's competitive, that's worth working on. And I think we've made some progress in that area. I think there are people who are both crypto and AI founders, like Ilya from Near and Ahmad. There are traditional AI founders like Alex from Pluralis, who holds a PhD in AI, who is actually quite good at convincing Web2 AI people that decentralized training is real and it can work. And I love the way he tells that story, which is always that first they say it's impossible, and then you show them the paper, and they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe. And then you show them the next paper, and they're like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. And you show them the third paper, and they want to join the startup. So in many ways, and last time I was here in Singapore was for the Super AI conference. I think it was in April, which was really the first time that crypto people and AI people came together in one conference. But at the same time, OpenAI wasn't here, Anthropic wasn't here, and so forth. So it's a cultural process to converge those two sides.
Yeah, I mean, I think for stuff that's super frontier, a lot of the academic research is concentrated in the US and in Canada and in certain sort of AI research labs, and you usually see founders spinning out of there and building things along those lines. And so there's certainly a lot of capital there. I found in terms of commercializing stuff that already exists, that happens everywhere in the world. I would say that I would imagine broadly there's a concentration in the US just because there are, frankly, just more founders in the US. But we have a handful of teams operating out of. We have one in Thailand. We have one in Dubai. We have one in by definition, things are distributed, and so we've seen founders come up from different places. But yeah, the really academic stuff comes from the US. Folks who are trying to like play it further up layers of the stack all over the place.
Yeah, pretty obvious. I might have a very different background. I came from Beijing, and I right now live in New York. And for our company, we have like 60% portfolio in United States, and otherwise is around Asia and Europe in general. I do feel like you see, there's different compliance issue as you said, but United States they're more generally like care about the data ownership and your privacy, but there's less government invention on that part. But Mount Asia, there's a lot of like regulation level coming from the government, and especially the focus of AI is very different. For example, in China, there's a lot of smart city efforts, and this is guided by the principle. And in Japan or Korea, there's a lot of electronic, robotic, and also consumer and AI. While I live in New York, I travel to San Fran a lot. They're doing the cutting edge research and doing the broader application. So it's very different. And also about the CCPA of California, like people debate a lot about like the privacy data, but in China we have like huge population, huge massive data, but no one like really care about what you're gonna use my data for, right? So you see like those two like very different part, but I think the common sense is regulation, especially combining AI with blockchain, especially crypto, is very challenging for both sides. So we've been really careful about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we invest globally. I mean, we're interested in great ideas and great talent, and wherever that is, that's fine. I think one interesting aspect to the AI projects we've looked at is that oftentimes the problems that a project is trying to solve are to some degree culturally specific, based on where they are or maybe where they're from. And we do take that into account to see if that specific problem might have a wider global application.
Okay, thank you. Now we don't have too much time left in the panel, so I'll ask you to be concise for this particular question. So we spoke about like the opportunities in the future and how it can be a big thing, but curious to hear your thoughts on how you answer the question, what can go wrong, right? Especially so, what can happen that's gonna turn this vertical to something that doesn't have any opportunity at all. So you as fund managers and investors, I'm sure you know the answer because that's what you should be thinking about, like what can go wrong here, what can go wrong here. But if you zoom out, what can we as an industry do wrong so that it doesn't have this opportunity of growth?
Well, very quickly, I mean, I think there's like a lot of overinvestment in AI broadly, and probably at this point in decentralized AI as well. So there's a lot of like redundancy and only really like a few kind of core problems. I guess like the biggest thing that can go wrong is, we don't find that kind of efficiency and scale in decentralized systems that kind of more centralized approaches find. And, in some sense that wouldn't be surprising because we don't see like that many decentralized systems today like out competing. But I hope that's not going to be true.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem that I can see is just the general lack of pragmatism. Like crypto capital markets give people much longer leashes generally than I think they deserve. I think that's why sort of my focus on just like who your customer is and sort of knowing very clearly where the money is going to come from. It's not always the first question that's asked in crypto. I think it should be asked much more often. But yeah, I think it's just like you can play in a sandbox in your own island for a very long time in crypto. And I think the more we sort of move towards like touching real people, the better it is.
Yeah, I'm low-key worried about we're like too obsessed with the idea of decentralized AI or crypto AI. You don't necessarily decentralize your infrastructure or whatever to make more like latency, make it more inaccessible, and also people will feel like, oh, everybody got a say in the DAO. But actually, if you really look into it, there's a lot of bribe, there's a lot of, like stake weight, whatever, is not really the idea we're looking for. So I feel like people were like, oh, I'm going to decentralize everything. And they were like, okay, centralized is bad, but it's actually not. I do think these two parts can coexist. And also you like merge gradually towards each other. It's not because, oh, this hype, there's like huge VCs out there and investing in this idea. It's more about like, how can you find your true PMF?
Since we're out of time, I'll be very brief. What can go wrong? Everything.
Thank you very much. On this optimistic note. All right, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thanks very much.